And that book is just phenomenal, and all of his work is phenomenal. So yeah, now we're going to get into it. So when you're talking about economics, you're talking about the marketplace, where goods and services are exchanged and sold, and those goods and services vary along quality and price. Obviously, cheaper prices, more expensive prices, you understand. The people of economics that are involved within economic activities fall into one of two camps. There are laborers who exchange their labor, their life, in exchange for a fixed rate of return via wages or salaries, bonuses, whatever. And then separate from them, but there's overlap, are capitalists, or people that make their money off of their capital, people that invest, people that own companies and grow companies, all of that kind of stuff. Capitalists, laborers, those are the two basic camps that the people operating within the marketplace fall into. But there's overlap. People can be both a laborer and a capitalist. So these two groups of people operating within the marketplace will engage in one of three types of economic activity: production, consumption, and investment. Consumption is kind of where all economic activity starts, because once human beings that have money want stuff and will trade that money for stuff, people will then respond to that and produce things in order to get the money from those people that are willing to consume and give up their money. So consumption drives production, and production is always responding to consumption. So if you have a growing consumer market, most likely you'll have a growing production market as well. Now, when consumption fuels production, it does so via paying a price, and that price, contained within that price, is a reimbursement for the cost of production, part of which includes labor value, and then also profit on top of that, which goes to capitalists and is their income and their ability, and creates their ability to consume and then reinvest, and then also laborers' ability to consume and reinvest. And then the cost of production is just the cost of production, and ongoing games where consumers are trying to find the cheapest products and the best quality products, and they keep paying the people who make the better quality products or the cheaper products. The people that are making the best quality products or the cheapest products will constantly gain ground within the marketplace, and goods and services will be more abundant and cheaper as time goes on, because of that constant competition to produce or provide those services or those goods to the people that are offering the consumption and that are demanding it. And then investment is just constantly the constant redirection of capital within the system to create more efficient or more profitable production. So we've got the people, we've got the activities, and now we need metrics within the marketplace to track success or failure for our political policies. These metrics include average income for individuals, median household income, GDP, which is a measure of the productivity of a country, jobs, which is obviously the demand for labor and probably the most important metric for laborers, unemployment, which is extremely important, and that does not measure the total number of people who don't have jobs. It measures the total number of people that are actively looking for jobs that cannot currently find jobs. So people that have jobs and that are looking for jobs are considered the active labor pool, and the unemployment rate is the measure within that group of people. It's the measure of how many of those people are unable to find work currently. Then you also have the labor participation rate, which is a measure of the total available labor supply and what percentage of those are actually working. So that's more of what you would think an unemployment rate would probably be, but it's different, labor participation rate. And as the labor participation rate goes up, that increases the number of jobs and economically active people that we have relative to the population. And obviously that is better, because that would mean we're more productive, we have more value relative to the cost of living for all of those human beings. Balance of trade would be another one. The inflation rate would be another one. Interest rates are another one. And then the value of different currencies and commodities across the world, including things like oil and gold. All those kinds of numbers are good to track, just in order to kind of understand what's happening in the economy, and then also to determine what success and failure looks like. You want higher GDP growth rates, and those are reports on GDP growth are given out quarterly and annually, and I encourage you to pay attention to both, because paying attention to the quarterly numbers will give you a more nuanced view than paying attention to just the annual numbers, but both are good. The jobs rate is announced on the first Friday of every month, so look out for those reports. And also there are corrections usually in those reports, meaning in the previous months jobs were too low, jobs were underreported, and so they have to correct for that. So pay attention to that, because if there's often lots of upward corrections, then that means that the initial numbers are consistently underreported, and then if the corrections are constantly downward, the initial numbers are usually overreported, and that will give you a more accurate sense of those numbers when they come out every month and what they actually mean. Because if you know every single month is going to have an eventual downward or upward correction, then you can correct for that when they come out initially, and then most of the time you will be right or wrong. The unemployment rate is actually weekly. Numbers come out on that weekly often. And then another metric to pay attention to would be cost of living, which is basically, rent, utilities, food, clothing, gas, things like that. The labor participation rate is something that you generally want to see having an upward trend as time goes on, but you can't force people to work, so sometimes that might not always be the case. But if there is a decreasing trend, you can usually attribute it to something, but if it's kind of zigzag, it is what it is. 1950 to 2000, we had a steadily increasing labor participation rate, and then starting from 2000 to 2016, that trend reversed, and we had consistent 16 years of a downward slope in the labor participation rate, and we've seen a leveling out so far in the Trump administration. And in 2, 3, 4 years, we'll see where, if he's still in office, we'll see where he gets us in time. Obviously, we want a low unemployment rate, we want decreasing cost of living, and we want a rising average income and a rising median household income, because you can have a rising average income because the rich are getting richer, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to the average person. But the median household income will give you a measure of the sort of average Joe's household and what they're making, and so growth in that number particularly is very, 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 very important. So we have the marketplace, we have the people, we have the activities, we have the metrics, and now we need some principles for how we are making decisions as far as policy goes within economics. The first of those principles is just the observation of the fact, it's not even really a principle, I don't think. Maybe it's a principle of thinking, but it comes from just the observation that decentralized systems outperform centralized systems in innovation, utility, and effectiveness, and variety of operation. They outperform centralized systems on all those fronts tremendously, and it's because of the relationship between the number of decision makers within a given system, the consequences of those decisions that they make, and the impact of those decisions. So when you have a handful of people making decisions in a system, that's a limited amount of brain power. But if you have the entire network of individuals making decisions in a system, and all that brain power is being used, obviously that means much more brain power, much better decision making in terms of the total range of good and bad decisions that'll be made. But the other side of that is just as important, if not more important, and that's when you have a decentralized individual system, the consequences of failure for one decision are the burden of that mistake is felt by one person. And then everyone else can actually learn from that mistake made by that one person. And so benefits can be widespread, but the costs of failure can be very diffuse and minimal, or very focused and minimal. So just to walk through this with a couple of hypothetical but essentially real life examples of this. First off, would you rather have would you rather have all individuals have the ability to control which products are made in these two examples I'm about to give? That's one question. And then the other question is, would you rather have all individuals choosing for themselves and trying to work to create this product and give it to every single individual? Or would you rather have a committee in Washington, D.C. in charge of creating this product and getting it to every single individual out there as much as they can? The two examples of products I'm going to give, one is deodorant. Now, deodorant varies based off of scents. It varies based off of antiperspirant versus deodorant. It varies based off of rub-on versus the spray can. And then also lots of people are going to have allergy issues. So we'll say there's two different types of allergies associated with deodorant that require specialized choices. If the first scenario is the case where you have individuals making decisions for their own production of deodorants and purchasing of deodorants, etc., they'll be able to screen for their own allergies very, very effectively, and they'll be able to pick the exact types of things that they want, and all the millions of consumer decisions that need to be made will be made very efficiently because it's made by all those individuals. If you have a committee in charge of that, the committee might forget that certain people have allergies, or send an alert, send a product with a chemical within it that someone's allergic to. They might send that to someone accidentally, and then that consequence leads to tens of thousands of deaths because of that allergy, because they send that same product out to everybody. And even if they could figure out a handful of the factors and scents and things like that, they have to make it, they have to ship it, they have to get it to you, they have to make sure it's what you want. Obviously, you don't want a committee in charge of that. And then the second example I gave, or that I was going to give, but I'm not even going to explain it, because it's a joke if you even think a committee could possibly ever do this. A computer. Do you think a committee could come up with a computer? Could create a computer from just having meetings and talking? No, you need to have unique individuals with the freedom to create, that can create these little innovations that have gigantic impacts over time. And you need to have the dynamic economy to actually scale up those inventions and actually make them available and abundant to everyday people. The other principle that I want to talk about, and I'm not even sure if it actually fits as a word principle, but it's just the word I'm using. The other principle we should maintain when considering economic policy is what I call labor scarcity. Labor scarcity is kind of associated with the labor participation rate, because as it goes up, labor is more scarce, and thus it's harder to hire people. There's few people available to hire, right? But the labor scarcity that I'm referring to as a sort of state of policy, or a state of conditions within the economy, particularly within the labor pool, the labor market, the type of labor scarcity I'm talking about is when the number of available jobs in the marketplace exceeds the number of unemployed people actively looking for jobs. Now, they might not always be in the same area, and so we need to have local unemployment shrunk down as well, which requires local good policy. But at this macroeconomic level, looking at the United States as a whole, as long as we have a situation where the total number of jobs available exceeds the total number of unemployed people, I call that labor scarcity, which means that there's jobs and employers that are actively looking to hire people that can't find people, and so you start having employers competing for employees instead of employees competing for jobs. And this grows wages because it is the demand exceeding the supply systemically. So labor scarcity is very, 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 very important when it comes to economic thinking. Now, standard economic theorizing sort of assumes a fixed economic system, and then all the models operate and all the equations operate within a fixed system typically. But the real world, and particularly trade, is not that way. It's the interaction between systems, and each country has its own tax code and own laws, own philosophies and own tax rates. I might have already said that, but each country has its own thing. So, and trade is the interaction between systems. So although this hypothetical consumption, production, investment sort of system and constant efficiency building and all that stuff growing the economy, although all that's true, that's a fixed system, and trade is the interaction between systems. And because of that, that means that consumption and production can be separated. So you can consume something in one country, but then the production, so the cost of production and the labor value and profit, is in a different country. Or at least in the case where you have trade and you have this happening, you can have it so that or usually it's the case that the labor value is completely in the other country, but the profits are split between the domestic business and the foreign business in question. All right. So next we need to consider that each country has its own labor market, its own labor pool, its own consumer market, and its own production market. So, but all of those different types of markets and all countries on the planet are all competing for the same global capital pool, because you have currency exchanges. Money can switch forms whenever it needs to, so all capital on the planet is available to all countries that wish to compete for it. So we need to have that competitive mindset, and we need to understand that other countries have their own consumer and labor pools that they are concerned about.